The Montana sky hung low and heavy on the morning Catherine Mercer stood in the ashes of her barn. October wind carried the smell of charred wood across the valley, mixing with the scent of approaching winter. She was 32 years old, dressed in a work dress the color of dust, her dark hair pulled back in a practical knot. Her hands, calloused from 8 months of working this land alone, hung loose at her sides. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears changed nothing. The barn had burned through the night. 6 riders, faces hidden behind bandanas, had come with torches and threats. They left before dawn, but not before one of them shouted back across the yard, "Sell or lose more than a barn, lady." The words hung in the air like smoke. Catherine walked the perimeter of the destruction slowly, methodically, the way a surgeon examines a wound. The livestock had scattered into the hills, the winter hay gone. The tools her husband had collected over 10 years melted into twisted metal sculptures. She paused at the northeast corner where the foundation stones had cracked from the heat. Something glinted in the ash. She knelt, brushing away gray powder with fingers that barely trembled. A metal box, blackened and warped, lay half-buried. The lock had melted away. Inside it, protected by layers of heat-scarred leather, was a key, not a barn key, not a house key, something else entirely. Catherine held it up to the morning light, turning it slowly. Brass, unusual design, with markings she did not recognize. Her mind traveled back 8 months. James, her husband, standing in the doorway at dawn before his last hunting trip, his hand on her shoulder. That serious look in his gray eyes. "If anything happens to me," he had said, "find the place only you would know to look." She had laughed it off then, kissed him, told him to stop being dramatic. 3 days later, Sheriff Vaughn had arrived with James's rifle and his wedding ring. "Your husband fell from the ridge trail up near Eagle Pass, ma'am. Broke his neck in the fall. Quick death, no suffering." Catherine closed her fist around the key. The metal was still warm from the fire. Hoofbeats approached from the east. She stood, slipping the key into her apron pocket, and watched Sheriff Daniel Vaughn ride up the dirt track toward her property. He was 45, broad across the shoulders with a mustache that had gone more gray than brown. He had been James's friend once. They had served together briefly during the war. Now he dismounted slowly, with the careful movements of a man approaching something he would rather avoid. "Mrs. Mercer." His voice was formal, distant. "I came as soon as I heard. This is terrible business." Catherine studied his face. He would not meet her eyes. She had known Daniel Vaughn for 10 years. She had served him coffee in her kitchen. She had watched him and James play cards on summer evenings. She knew what guilt looked like. "Any idea who might have done this, Sheriff?" Vaughn removed his hat, turned it in his hands. His fingers worked at the brim. "Hard to say. Could be drifters. Could be anyone with a grudge. These are uncertain times. They mentioned the railroad." Catherine's voice was level, empty of accusation. "They said I should accept Mr. Kane's offer before I lose more than a barn." Something flickered across Vaughn's face. Pain, perhaps. Or shame. "Victor Kane is a businessman, Mrs. Mercer. A hard man, I won't deny that, but I can't imagine he would sanction something like this. Can't you?" The question hung between them. Vaughn looked away toward the mountains, toward anywhere but her face. "I'll file a report, do what I can, but without witnesses, without evidence, my hands are tied." "Of course they are." Catherine turned back toward the ruins. "Thank you for coming, Sheriff. I know you are a very busy man." Vaughn hesitated. There was something he wanted to say. Catherine could feel the weight of unspoken words pressing against his silence, but he was a man who had learned to swallow truths that tasted like poison. He put his hat back on, mounted his horse, and rode away without looking back. Catherine waited until he was out of sight. Then she walked to the house. The afternoon light was fading when she finally allowed herself to sit. The house felt too large, too empty, filled with furniture meant for 2 people, for a family that had never quite materialized. She and James had tried. God knows they had tried. But children had not come easy. 3 pregnancies in 4 years, and 3 losses. The last one had been the worst. 4 months along, enough time to hope, to plan, to imagine a nursery. Then the cramping, the blood, the long, terrible night with only James's hand to hold on to. After that, they had stopped trying. Not officially. They simply stopped talking about it. James had thrown himself into his work. She had volunteered as a nurse in town, using the skills she had learned during the war when she was barely 20 years old, following the Union Army through Tennessee and Georgia, holding the hands of dying boys who called her mother, sister, Mary, anything but her real name. She stood and walked to the window. The sun was setting behind the western hills, turning the grasslands to gold. Somewhere out there, James was buried. A simple marker on a windswept hill. She had not been able to afford anything grander. 7 months had passed since the hunting accident, if that was what it truly was. 7 months of working this land alone, of debt mounting, of grief that came in waves when she least expected it. A knock at the back door broke her thoughts. Catherine's hand went instinctively to the rifle mounted above the fireplace. She lifted it down, checked the load by habit, and moved quietly through the kitchen. The knock came again, not aggressive, almost hesitant. "Who is it?" A voice from the other side of the door, rough with age and travel. "Name's Elias Crane, ma'am. I knew your husband. I need to speak with you. It's about how he died." Catherine's finger moved to the trigger guard. "How do I know you are who you say?" There was a pause. Then the voice spoke again, quieter this time. James had a scar on his left shoulder blade, shaped like a crescent moon, from a Shoshone arrow in '67. He never told anyone about it except the men he served with, and his wife. Catherine's breath caught. It was true. She had traced that scar with her fingers 100 times in the dark. She lowered the rifle slightly, unlocked the door, and opened it a crack. The man on her porch was perhaps 50, lean as winter-stripped wood, with eyes the color of creek water. He wore a battered coat and carried himself like someone who had spent more time on horseback than on foot. He held his hands away from his sides, showing he was unarmed. "I am sorry to come unannounced, Mrs. Mercer, but I reckon you have had some trouble recently. The barn." He nodded toward the blackened ruins visible in the distance. Catherine opened the door wider, but did not invite him in. "What do you know about my husband?" Elias Crane looked past her, into the house, as if checking for listeners. Then his eyes came back to hers. "James Mercer did not die in a hunting accident." "And you know that, don't you, ma'am? You have known it for 8 months. You just did not have proof." The words hit like a physical blow. Catherine's hands tightened on the rifle. "Get off my property." Crane did not move. He reached slowly into his coat pocket. Catherine raised the rifle. Crane froze. "Easy, ma'am, just a photograph. I think you will want to see it." He withdrew a folded piece of paper and held it out. Catherine hesitated, then took it with her free hand, stepping back to keep distance between them. She unfolded it awkwardly, one-handed, the rifle still trained on Crane. The photograph was old, the edges worn soft. It showed 2 men standing in front of a stone building. One of them was James, younger, before the gray had touched his temples. He was smiling, which was rare for him in photographs. Beside him stood another man, taller, with pale eyes and a thin smile. Someone had torn the photograph, ripping through the second man's face, leaving only a jagged edge. At the bottom, in James's careful handwriting, were the words, "Fort Benton Arsenal, 1878. "Where did you get this?" From James himself, 3 years ago. "He sent it to me with a letter. Said if anything happened to him, I should make sure you saw it, that you would understand what it meant. I do not understand anything." Catherine's voice was steady, but her heart was racing. "Who is the other man?" Crane's face hardened. "That is Victor Kane. And your husband is not a hunter, Mrs. Mercer. He was a government scout, a weapons specialist. After the war, he worked for the Army, transporting munitions through hostile territory. Kane worked with him. They were partners. And then Kane became something else." Catherine lowered the rifle slowly. The photograph trembled in her hand. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because Kane is here, in Clearwater, working for the railroad, or so he claims. And I think he is the one who killed James. I think he is the one who burned your barn. And I think he is going to kill you too if you do not listen to what I have to say." Catherine stepped back, her mind racing. Victor Kane. She knew the name. He was the land agent for Northwestern Railroad, the man who had made 3 offers on her property in the past 6 months. The man whose letters grew more insistent with each refusal. The man Sheriff Vaughn had called a hard businessman, nothing more. "Come inside," she heard herself say, "but keep your hands where I can see them." They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the rifle between them. Crane spoke for nearly an hour. He told her about Fort Benton, about the cache of weapons stored there after the war. Rifles, ammunition, explosives. Enough to arm a small rebellion. The government had sealed it, classified it, tried to forget about it, but men like James were paid to remember, to guard the secret. And Kane wanted to sell it, black market. Confederate sympathizers, Indian tribes, anyone with money. James refused. They fought. Kane left the army under a cloud. We thought that was the end of it. Crane's jaw tightened. But men like Kane do not forget, and they do not forgive. You think the weapons are still there, at Fort Benton? Crane shook his head. "No, ma'am, I think they are here, under your land. I think James moved them years ago, hid them somewhere only he knew, and I think Kane figured it out. The railroad is just a cover. Kane wants what is buried here, and he will do anything to get it." Catherine felt the room tilt slightly. She gripped the edge of the table. "That is insane. James never said anything about weapons, about any of this. He was protecting you." Crane's voice was gentle. "The less you knew, the safer you were. At least that was the idea. But things have changed. Kane is getting desperate. The railroad has given him a deadline, and desperate men make mistakes." Catherine's mind was spinning. She thought of James's late nights, his long absences explained as hunting trips. The way he would sometimes wake in the dark, listening to sounds only he could hear. The root cellar he had insisted on building, far deeper than necessary. The door he always kept locked. The key in her pocket suddenly felt like it weighed 10 pounds. "Where are the weapons?" she asked quietly. "I do not know. James never told me. He said there was a place only you would know to look." Crane leaned forward. "Did he ever say anything like that to you?" Catherine's mind flashed back. The morning of his last trip. "If anything happens to me, find the place only you would know to look." She had thought he meant a hiding spot for money, for important papers. "Not this. Never this. I need to think." She stood abruptly. "You need to go." Crane rose as well. "Be careful, Mrs. Mercer. Kane has men watching. He knows I came here tonight. He will know we talked." He paused at the door. "If you find anything, do not try to move it. Do not try to sell it. Just send word to me. I am staying at the boarding house in town. Ask for Silas Grant. It is not my real name, but the landlady does not need to know that." After he left, Catherine locked the door and stood in the silence of her kitchen. Outside, night had fallen completely. She could hear coyotes singing to each other across the hills. The sound made her feel incredibly alone. She lit a lamp and walked to the root cellar door. It was at the back of the house, accessible through the pantry. James had built it himself the second year they lived here. She had thought it excessive at the time, too large for just storing vegetables and preserves. Now she understood. The key fit perfectly. The door opened onto stone steps descending into darkness. Catherine held the lamp high and went down carefully, counting steps. 10, 15, 20. Far deeper than any root cellar needed to be. The air was cool and dry, smelling of earth and something else. Gun oil. At the bottom, the lamplight revealed a room perhaps 20 feet square. The walls were lined with shelves, and on those shelves was an arsenal, rifles of every make and model. Handguns in careful rows, boxes of ammunition stacked to the ceiling, workbenches covered in tools she barely recognized. And in the center of it all, a desk, and on that desk, a journal bound in dark leather. Catherine set down the lamp with trembling hands and opened the journal. James's handwriting covered every page, diagrams, calculations, dates, and on the first page an inscription for Catherine. If you are reading this, I have failed to protect you the way I promised. Everything in this room is yours now. Use it wisely. Use it to survive. I am sorry I could not tell you the truth while I lived. I loved you too much to burden you with these secrets. But the time for secrets has passed. The weapons are real. The danger is real. Trust no one, especially not Cain. He will come for what is buried here, and he will not stop until he has it, or you are dead. Forgive me. I never meant for it to end this way. James. Catherine's vision blurred. She wiped her eyes roughly and forced herself to read on. The journal was meticulous. Maps, coordinates, technical specifications for weapons she had never heard of, and near the end, a passage that made her blood run cold. The cache beneath the southern field contains approximately $500,000 worth of rifles and explosives. Government property, sealed by order of the War Department in 1879. I was paid to ensure it remained hidden. I have done my duty. But if Cain has found this journal, if he has found you, then know this. The weapons are not the true treasure. The true treasure is the land itself, the creek, the access to the valley, the route for the railroad. Cain will use the weapons as an excuse, but what he really wants is control of this valley. Do not let him have it. Do not let my death be for nothing. Catherine closed the journal. Her hands were shaking. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the small window at ground level. She looked around the workshop, at the weapons her husband had hidden, at the legacy of violence and secrets he had left behind. For the first time in 8 months, Catherine Mercer allowed herself to feel something other than grief. She felt anger, pure, clean, focused anger. James had died for this land. Whether it was an accident or murder, he had died trying to protect something he believed was worth protecting. And now, men with torches and threats thought they could simply take it from her. Thought a widow would be easy to frighten, easy to break. They were wrong. Catherine picked up one of the rifles from the wall. It was lighter than she expected, balanced. James had modified it somehow. She could see his careful work in every detail. There was a label tied to the trigger guard, for Catherine, when I cannot protect you anymore. He had known. Somehow he had known this day would come, and he had prepared for it. She spent the rest of the night in the workshop, reading the journal by lamplight. James had not just collected weapons. He had created them, modified them, improved them. Each rifle had notes, each pistol had a purpose, and throughout the journal, scattered like breadcrumbs, were lessons. How to sight a target, how to account for wind, how to move quietly, how to survive. As dawn broke over Clearwater Valley, Catherine climbed the stairs back to her house. She was exhausted, her eyes burning from reading by inadequate light, but she felt something she had not felt in months: purpose. She made coffee, strong and bitter, and stood at her kitchen window watching the sun rise. In the distance, she could see riders on the eastern ridge, 3 of them, silhouetted against the morning sky, watching her house, making sure she knew she was being watched. Catherine raised her coffee cup to them in a silent salute. Let them watch. Let them think they had her trapped, alone, vulnerable. They would learn the truth soon enough. The sound of footsteps on the porch made her turn. She recognized the gate. Young. Hurried. Samuel Torres, the 17-year-old boy who did odd jobs around the property. She had kept him on after James died, partly out of charity, partly because she needed the help. He was a good kid, quiet, hard-working. His parents had died of fever when he was 12, leaving him and his older brother to fend for themselves. The brother Thomas had died 2 years ago in a mining accident. At least, that was the official story. Catherine opened the door before Samuel could knock. His young face was tight with worry. "Mrs. Mercer, I saw the riders. Are you all right?" "I am fine, Samuel. Come in. Have you eaten?" The boy shook his head. Catherine gestured him to the table and began frying eggs and salt pork. Samuel sat awkwardly, his hat in his hands. "I heard about the barn," he spoke quietly. "I am sorry. If I had been here, maybe I could have done something." "There were 6 of them, Samuel, armed men. You would have gotten yourself killed." The boy's jaw set stubbornly. "Still, I should have been here." Catherine set a plate in front of him. "Eat. Then we will talk." She waited until he had finished, until some color had returned to his face. Then she sat across from him and folded her hands on the table. "Samuel, I need to ask you something. Your brother, how did he really die?" The boy's face went pale, then red. His hands clenched into fists. They said it was an accident. Cave-in at the mine. But Thomas was the most careful miner they had. He checked supports twice. He would never have gone into an unsafe shaft. Who owned the mine? It was on Thompson land, but it was leased to a company out of Helena, some development corporation. Samuel's voice turned bitter. After Thomas died, they shut down the mine, said it was too dangerous, paid out some money to keep folks quiet. But I always wondered, did the company have a name? Northwestern Development. Samuel looked up at her. Why? Because that is the same company trying to buy my land. And I am starting to think your brother's death was not an accident any more than my husband's was. Samuel's eyes widened. You think they killed Thomas because he would not sell? I think someone did. And I think that same someone burned my barn last night. Catherine leaned forward. Samuel, I am going to fight them. I am going to find out what happened to James and to your brother. But I cannot do it alone. I need help. I need someone I can trust. The boy straightened in his chair. You can trust me, Mrs. Mercer. I swear it. This will be dangerous. If they were willing to kill James, they will not hesitate to kill you. I do not care. Samuel's voice was fierce. Thomas was all I had. If someone took him from me, I want them to pay. Catherine studied his face. He was young, barely more than a child, but the frontier made people grow up fast. And she could see the steel in him, the same hardness she had seen in soldiers during the war. The look of someone who had already lost everything that mattered. All right, she stood. Come with me. There is something you need to see. She led him down to the workshop. Samuel's reaction was everything she expected. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, mouth open, staring at the arsenal James had assembled. Holy God, where did all this come from? My husband. It turns out he had a life before me, before this farm. Catherine picked up the journal. And he left instructions. We are going to learn how to use these weapons. We are going to prepare. And when they come back, and they will come back, we are going to be ready. Samuel nodded slowly. His eyes moved from rifle to rifle, taking it all in. Then he looked back at her. You ever shoot a gun before, ma'am? Catherine thought of the war. Of the pistol she had carried through Georgia, never fired, but always loaded. Of the night a Confederate deserter had broken into the field hospital and she had aimed that pistol at his chest, finger on the trigger, before an orderly tackled him from behind. She had been 20 years old and her hands had not shaken. Once or twice. She kept her voice neutral. But I am a quick learner. And so are you. They spent the morning in the workshop. Catherine read aloud from James's journal while Samuel examined weapons. The boy had a natural aptitude, she noticed. His hands moved confidently over the mechanisms, understanding how pieces fit together. James had included drawings, detailed diagrams of how to load, how to aim, how to maintain each weapon. It was like having a teacher speaking from beyond the grave. By noon they had selected half a dozen rifles and twice as many pistols. Catherine found ammunition, cleaning supplies, targets. James had thought of everything. There was even a section of the journal devoted to defensive positions around the property, where to place shooters for maximum coverage, how to create fields of fire, how to turn a farmhouse into a fortress. We need to practice. Samuel looked up from the rifle he was holding. If we are going to do this, we need to know we can actually hit what we are aiming at. Catherine agreed. But not here. Too close to the house. And those riders are still watching. She thought for a moment. There is a ravine on the north side of the property, hidden from the road. We can set up targets there. They spent the afternoon learning to shoot. It was harder than Catherine expected. The rifles kicked viciously. The pistols were heavy and awkward. Her nursing training meant she understood anatomy, trajectory, the mechanics of how bullets damaged flesh. But understanding and execution were different things. The first dozen shots went wide. Samuel fared better, his young eyes sharper, his hands steadier. But Catherine was determined. She read James's notes on breath control, on stance, on the moment between heartbeats when the body is most still. Slowly, painfully, she began to improve. By the time the sun was setting, she could hit a target at 50 yards 3 times out of 5. Not good enough, but a start. Samuel was grinning as they walked back to the house. That was incredible. Did you see that shot I made, right through the center of the can? I saw. Catherine managed to smile. You have a gift for it. My pa used to take me hunting before he died, said I had the eye for it. Samuel's grin faded. Thomas was better, though. He could drop a deer at 200 yards. They reached the house as full darkness fell. Catherine was exhausted, her shoulder bruised from the rifle's recoil, her ears still ringing. But she felt more alive than she had in months. They cleaned the weapons by lamplight, following James's meticulous instructions. The work was meditative, calming. The sound of breaking glass shattered the night. Catherine's hand went to her pistol instantly. Samuel appeared in the doorway, rifle ready. They heard footsteps on the porch, heavy and deliberate. Then a body hit the front door with a thud. Catherine moved to the window and peered out carefully. A figure lay crumpled on her porch, blood pooling beneath him. Even in the darkness, she recognized the battered coat. Elias Crane. She threw open the door and dragged him inside, Samuel covering her with the rifle. Crane was gasping, his hand pressed to his shoulder where blood seeped between his fingers. His face was gray with shock. Kane, he managed. His men, they found me, shot me, as I was leaving your property. He coughed, wincing. I played dead. They dragged me to a ravine, threw me in. But the fall broke my descent. Branches. I climbed out after they left. You need a doctor. Catherine pressed a cloth to his wound, her nurse training taking over. No time. Crane gripped her wrist with surprising strength. Listen. Victor Kane killed James. I have proof. A witness who saw it happen. But the witness is afraid. You need to find him. His name is Thomas Whitley, works at the lumber mill. He saw Kane shoot James and stage the accident. Where is this witness now? Hiding, scared. Crane's breathing was becoming labored. Tell him Elias sent you. Tell him it is time to stop being afraid. His eyes closed briefly, then opened again. I am going north, into Canada. Kane thinks I am dead. Better to keep it that way until this is over. You cannot ride in this condition. I have to. Crane struggled to sit up. Samuel helped him, though the boy looked dubious. Kane will come for you next. Tonight, tomorrow, soon. You need to be ready, and you need that witness to testify. Catherine helped Crane to his feet. He swayed, pale and sweating, but determined. She gave him water, bandaged his shoulder as best she could, and watched him stagger to his horse. Stay alive, Mrs. Mercer, he said as he mounted awkwardly. James would want you to stay alive. Then he rode into the darkness, leaving Catherine standing on her blood-stained porch. An hour later, Sheriff Vaughn arrived. Catherine had just finished cleaning the blood when she heard his horse. She opened the door before he could knock. Vaughn stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking older than he had that morning. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face haggard. It is late, Sheriff. I know, I am sorry, but I could not sleep. Not after today. Vaughn looked past her into the house. Can I come in? What I have to say I would rather not say where others might hear. Catherine stepped aside. Vaughn entered, moving like a man carrying a great weight. He saw Samuel in the kitchen doorway and nodded. Evening, son. Samuel nodded back, warily. What is this about? Catherine asked. Vaughn turned to face her. His hands twisted his hat. I lied to you this morning about James, about the accident." His voice cracked. "I have been lying for 8 months and I cannot do it any more." Catherine felt her heart hammering. "Tell me." The sheriff reached into his coat and withdrew something wrapped in cloth. He unfolded it carefully. Inside was a spent bullet casing, large caliber, unusual markings. "I found this at the base of Eagle Pass, near where James's body was found." Vaughn's voice was barely above a whisper. "That is not a hunting rifle round. That is a 45-70 government military grade. And there is only one man in this territory who carries a rifle chambered for that round." "Who?" "Victor Kane." The name fell like a stone into still water. Catherine's hand tightened on the pistol. "You are saying Kane murdered my husband. I am saying I found evidence that suggested it, and I was told to bury that evidence." Vaughn looked at her directly for the first time. "Kane has powerful friends, the railroad, the territorial governor, men who do not want scandal, men who do not want delays. I was given a choice. Rule it an accident or lose my job, maybe lose more than my job." He swallowed hard. "I have a wife, 2 daughters. I was afraid." "So you let him get away with murder?" "Yes." Vaughn's voice broke completely. "Yes, I did. And I have to live with that every day. I see your face in town, and I want to crawl into a hole and die. But tonight, after seeing what they did to your barn, after seeing you stand there in those ashes, I realized something. They are not going to stop. Kane is going to keep pushing until you are dead or gone. And I cannot let that happen again. I cannot live with another death on my conscience." Catherine stood very still. Part of her wanted to shoot him right there, for his cowardice, for his betrayal of James. But another part, the part that had learned mercy in the war, understood. Fear made people do terrible things. And Vaughn had come here tonight knowing she might kill him for the truth. "What do you want from me, Sheriff? I want to help." Vaughn straightened slightly. "I cannot arrest Kane without more evidence, but I can watch. I can listen. I can warn you when I hear things. And when the time comes, when you have what you need, I will stand with you. I will testify. I will do whatever it takes to see justice done." Catherine considered this. It could be a trap. Kane could have sent him to gain her trust, to find out what she knew. But looking at Vaughn's face, at the genuine anguish there, she did not think so. This was a man breaking under the weight of his own guilt. "All right." She lowered the pistol slightly. "You can help. But if you betray me again, if you go to Kane, I will kill you myself. Do you understand?" Vaughn nodded. "I understand. And I would not blame you." He left shortly after, disappearing into the night. Samuel emerged from the kitchen, his face troubled. "Can we trust him?" "I do not know." Catherine locked the door. "But we do not have many allies. We take what we can get." That night Catherine lay in bed, unable to sleep. Her mind raced with everything she had learned. James, murdered. Kane, the killer. A fortune in weapons buried somewhere on her land. A railroad company willing to burn and kill to get what they wanted. She thought of the child she had lost, the children she would never have, the future she and James had planned that would never come to pass. For 8 months she had been adrift, purposeless, going through the motions of living without truly being alive. But now, lying in the darkness, she felt something crystallizing inside her. Not just anger, not just grief, something harder, colder, more focused. She would not run. She would not sell. She would not bend. She would fight. And if Victor Kane wanted what was buried on her land, he would have to go through her to get it. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. Somewhere in the hills, a gunshot echoed, then silence. Catherine closed her eyes and, for the first time in months, slept without nightmares. When she woke before dawn, the rain had come. She dressed quickly and went down to the workshop. Samuel was already there, cleaning weapons, his young face set with determination. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready?" He looked up at her. "What is the plan?" Catherine picked up James's journal and opened it to a marked page. "First, we learn everything in here. Every tactic, every strategy. Then we prepare the property. Then we wait for Kane to make his next move." She looked at the boy steadily. "And when he does, we will be ready to make him regret ever coming to Clearwater Valley." Samuel smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had found a purpose in revenge. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing away the ash from the burned barn, cleansing the land. In the distance, thunder rolled across the mountains. The storm was just beginning. 3 days after Sheriff Vaughn's confession, Catherine stood in the cemetery on the hill above Clearwater. The rain had stopped, leaving the world scrubbed clean and gleaming. Before her, a simple wooden cross marked James's grave. She had brought wildflowers, late autumn blooms the color of bruises. "I know the truth now," she said quietly, "about Kane, about what you were protecting." She knelt, placing the flowers against the headstone. "I am not going to let him win, James. I promise you that." The wind moved through the grass, carrying voices from the town below. Catherine turned and saw a wagon making its way up the main street. More families leaving. The third wagon this week. Kane's pressure was working. People were selling, taking whatever money they could get, fleeing before worse things happened. Catherine walked down from the cemetery, her boots crunching on gravel. She had dressed carefully this morning, clean clothes, hair pinned properly. She wanted to look respectable, controlled, when she faced what was coming, because today was the day Kane had called his town meeting. The schoolhouse was already crowded when she arrived. Every bench filled, people standing along the walls. Catherine recognized most of them: farmers, ranchers, shopkeepers, the backbone of Clearwater. Their faces were worried, uncertain, looking for someone to tell them everything would be all right. At the front of the room stood Victor Kane. Catherine had seen him before, but always at a distance. Now, for the first time, she studied the man who had killed her husband. He was perhaps 45, tall and lean, with pale eyes that missed nothing. His suit was expensive, Eastern cut, the kind of clothes that said money and power. His hands were clean, manicured, not the hands of a man who did his own dirty work. But Catherine had read James's journal. She knew what those hands had done. The men they had killed, the weapons they had stolen, the betrayals they had orchestrated. Kane was speaking, his voice smooth and reasonable. "The railroad brings progress, ladies and gentlemen, employment, trade, connection to the wider world. Clearwater Valley stands at a crossroads of history. You can embrace the future or you can cling to the past. The choice is yours." An older farmer stood, his weathered face skeptical. "And what about those of us who do not want to sell? What happens to us?" Kane's smile never wavered. "I understand your attachment to the land. Truly, I do. But the railroad has been granted authority by the territorial government. Eminent domain, they call it. If negotiation fails, the law allows us to proceed anyway." He spread his hands apologetically. "I would much prefer voluntary agreements, fair compensation, neighborly cooperation. But the railroad will be built one way or another." "That is a threat," someone called from the back. "That is reality." Kane's voice hardened slightly. "I am trying to help you avoid the unpleasantness that resistance brings. Ask Mrs. Mercer about that." Every head in the room turned to look at Catherine. She felt their eyes, their judgment, their fear. She stood slowly, meeting Kane's gaze across the crowded room. "Mr. Kane," she said, her voice carrying clearly, "I have a question about Northwestern Railroad's land acquisition practices." "Of course, Mrs. Mercer." Kane's smile was condescending. "I am always happy to address concerns. How many other property owners have experienced fires, accidents, mysterious deaths?" She took a step forward. "How many people have you murdered to get what you want?" The room erupted. Gasps, angry murmurs. Kane raised his hands, his expression wounded. "Mrs. Mercer, I understand you are grieving. Your husband's tragic accident, the terrible fire at your barn. These things have clearly affected your judgment. But to accuse me of murder is not only false, It is slanderous." "Is it?" Catherine reached into her pocket and withdrew the photograph Elias Crane had given her. She held it up. "This is you and my husband at Fort Benton Arsenal in 1878. You worked together transporting government weapons until you decided to steal them and sell them on the black market." Kane's face went very still. "Where did you get that?" "From a man named Elias Crane. Perhaps you remember him. He visited me 3 nights ago. Told me all about your partnership with James, about the weapons cache, about how you tried to recruit my husband into your scheme, and he refused." Kane was no longer smiling. "That photograph proves nothing. It shows 2 men who once worked together, ancient history. Then why did you kill him?" Catherine's voice rose. "Why did you shoot him and throw his body off Eagle Pass and pay Sheriff Vaughn to call it an accident?" The room went deathly quiet. All eyes turned to Sheriff Vaughn, who stood near the door, his face pale. The sheriff said nothing, but his silence was damning. Kane's composure cracked slightly. "You are hysterical, Mrs. Mercer, inventing conspiracies to explain random misfortune. I have never killed anyone. I am a businessman, nothing more. Then you will not mind if I show everyone this." Catherine produced the bullet casing Vaughn had given her, .45-70 government caliber. "Found at the site where my husband died, the same caliber you carry in that custom rifle of yours." Kane's hand twitched toward his coat, then stopped. His pale eyes narrowed. "Anyone could have fired that shot. Dozens of men carry that caliber. But not many carry it in this valley." Catherine took another step forward. "And not many had a reason to want James dead, except the man who knew he was guarding a fortune in weapons, the man who wanted those weapons badly enough to commit murder." The crowd was murmuring now, louder. Catherine could see doubt spreading across faces. Kane could feel it too. His jaw tightened. "This meeting is over." He gathered his papers quickly. "I will not stand here and be accused of crimes by a delusional widow. The railroad's offer stands for 48 more hours. After that, we proceed through legal channels. I suggest you all think very carefully about your choices." He strode toward the door. The crowd parted for him. But as he passed Catherine, he leaned close enough that only she could hear. "You are making a terrible mistake, Mrs. Mercer." Elias Crane was a fool who did not know when to stop asking questions. His voice was a whisper, cold as winter. "I buried him last night in a ravine where no one will ever find him. Keep pushing, and you will join him." Then he was gone, leaving Catherine standing in the middle of the schoolhouse, her heart pounding. The crowd erupted in conversation. Some people hurried after Kane, clearly frightened. Others clustered around Catherine asking questions, demanding to know more. But Catherine barely heard them. Kane's words echoed in her mind. "I buried him last night. Elias Crane was dead. The man who had brought her the truth, who had tried to warn her, was gone. And Kane had just confessed to killing him. But only she had heard it. No witnesses, no proof." Samuel appeared at her elbow. "Mrs. Mercer, we should go." Catherine nodded. They pushed through the crowd and out into the afternoon sunlight. The street was emptying quickly, people hurrying home, locking doors, pulling children inside. Fear had settled over Clearwater like a fog. As they walked toward where Catherine had tied her horse, a woman stepped out from behind the general store. She was perhaps 50, handsome in a severe way, with iron-gray hair and intelligent eyes. Catherine recognized her. Abigail Hawkins, who owned the dry goods shop. "Mrs. Mercer, a word?" Catherine stopped. "Mrs. Hawkins, how can I help you?" Abigail glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "Not here. Come to my shop tonight. After dark. There are others who need to speak with you, others who have refused to sell." She met Catherine's eyes. "You are not alone in this fight, even if it feels that way." Before Catherine could respond, Abigail was gone, disappearing back into her store. Samuel looked at Catherine questioningly. "Do we trust her?" Catherine thought of the cemetery, of James's grave on the hill. She thought of all the lonely months since his death, facing everything alone. "I do not know," she said finally, "but I think we have to try." They returned to the farm as the sun was setting. The burned barn cast long shadows across the yard. Catherine had not yet cleared the debris. Part of her wanted to leave it standing as a reminder of what Cain had done, of what she was fighting for. Inside, she and Samuel prepared. They cleaned weapons, checked ammunition, reviewed the defensive positions James had mapped out in his journal. If Cain came tonight, if he decided to finish what he started, they would be ready. But the night passed quietly, too quietly. Catherine found herself unable to sleep, listening to every sound, every creak of the house settling, every gust of wind. She stood at her bedroom window, watching the road, waiting for riders who never came. Just before dawn, Samuel knocked on her door. "Mrs. Mercer, you should see this." She followed him outside. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, and on the horizon, toward town, was a glow that had nothing to do with sunrise. Fire. They saddled horses and rode hard toward Clearwater. Other riders were converging from all directions, drawn by the flames. As they crested the last hill, Catherine saw what was burning. The Hawkins dry goods store was an inferno. Flames leaped 50 feet into the air, consuming wood and goods with terrible hunger. People formed bucket lines from the town well, but it was hopeless. The building was already lost. Catherine dismounted and ran toward the crowd. "Where is Mrs. Hawkins? Has anyone seen Abigail?" A man grabbed her arm. She was inside. "We tried to get to her, but the heat drove us back." Catherine felt the world tilt. No, that is not possible. I just spoke with her yesterday. I am sorry, ma'am." The man's face was sincere. "We did everything we could." Catherine pushed through the crowd, getting as close to the blaze as she could stand. The heat was incredible, searing. Through the flames, she could see the outline of the building collapsing inward, timbers falling, merchandise burning. Someone had done this. Someone had set this fire, and Catherine knew exactly who. She found Sheriff Vaughn standing apart from the crowd, watching the fire with hollow eyes. The sheriff did not look at her as she approached. "This was Cain," she said flatly. "I do not know that." Vaughn's voice was dead. "Could have been an accident. A lamp, a spark from the stove. At 4 in the morning, when the store has been closed since evening?" Vaughn finally looked at her. His face was gray. "What do you want me to say, Mrs. Mercer? That I know he did this? That I can prove it?" "I cannot. Just like I could not prove he killed James. Just like I cannot prove anything." "You are a coward." "Yes." Vaughn nodded slowly. "Yes, I am. But I am a coward trying to do the right thing." He reached into his coat. "This came for you. Delivered to my office an hour ago." He handed her an envelope. Expensive paper, sealed with red wax. Catherine broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was elegant, educated. "Mrs. Mercer, I regret that our conversation yesterday became heated. I am a reasonable man, willing to compromise. I am prepared to offer you $10,000 for your property, double my previous offer. In light of recent events, this seems more than generous. You have 24 hours to accept. After that, I will be forced to pursue other options. Sincerely, Victor Cain." Catherine crumpled the letter. "He is threatening me, right here in writing. Can you not arrest him for that?" "Threatening what?" Vaughn gestured helplessly. "He does not say he will hurt you. He does not admit to anything. It is all implications and suggestions. No court would convict him based on that letter." Catherine watched the Hawkins store burn. Somewhere in that inferno was Abigail, a woman who had offered to help, who had tried to organize resistance, now dead because she dared to stand up. "I need to see the body," Catherine heard herself say. Vaughn looked at her sharply. "Why?" "Because I want to know how she died." Catherine's voice was cold. "I want to see if she burned to death or if someone killed her first." The fire burned through the morning. When the flames finally died down, men with shovels began sifting through the wreckage. They found Abigail Hawkins near what had been the back door. The doctor examined her briefly, then covered her with a blanket. Catherine pushed past the men and knelt beside the body. "Doctor, I need to see her." The doctor, an older man named Preston, shook his head. "No, ma'am. You do not want to remember her like this, please." Something in Catherine's voice made him step aside. She pulled back the blanket. Abigail's body was badly burned, almost unrecognizable. But Catherine's nurse training kicked in automatically. She examined the corpse with clinical detachment, looking past the horror to the details beneath. There, on the back of the skull, a depression, the bone fractured inward. "She was struck from behind," Catherine said quietly, "before the fire. Someone hit her hard enough to crack her skull, then set the blaze to cover the murder." Dr. Preston leaned closer, squinting. He pulled out spectacles and examined the wound Catherine had found. His face went pale. "My God, you are right. This was not an accident." Sheriff Vaughn appeared beside them. "What did you find?" "Evidence of murder," Catherine said, standing. "She was struck down, then burned, just like my barn was burned. Just like my husband was shot and his body staged to look like an accident." She turned to face Vaughn. "How many more people have to die before you do something?" The sheriff looked at the corpse, at the burned building, at the crowd of townspeople watching. His hands clenched into fists. Then he turned and walked away without a word. Catherine watched him go. Samuel touched her arm gently. "What now?" "Now we prepare." Catherine covered Abigail's body again. "Cain has shown his hand. He is willing to kill anyone who opposes him, which means we are all in danger." That afternoon, Catherine returned to her farm and went straight to the workshop. She had been studying James's journal every night, learning not just how to shoot, but how to think tactically, how to turn disadvantage into advantage, how to make the enemy fight on your terms, not theirs. She opened the journal to a section marked Defensive Fortifications. James had drawn detailed diagrams of the property, marking fields of fire, natural choke points, places where a small force could hold against larger numbers. She studied these now with new urgency. Samuel found her there hours later, surrounded by maps and notes. "We have a visitor," he said. "He sounds nervous." "Who?" "Says his name is Isaiah Cross, United States Marshal." Catherine's head snapped up. "A marshal? Here?" She followed Samuel upstairs. A man stood in her yard, holding the reins of a dusty horse. He was perhaps 40, lean and weathered, with eyes that assessed everything with professional calm. A badge gleamed on his vest. "Mrs. Mercer?" His voice was rough from travel. "I am Marshal Isaiah Cross out of Helena. I understand you have been having some trouble with a man named Victor Cain." Catherine approached cautiously. "What is the federal government's interest in a property dispute?" "It is not the property I care about." Cross tied his horse and faced her. "I have been tracking Cain for 3 years. He is wanted for murder in Wyoming, the killing of a federal land surveyor in 1882. I almost had him then, but he disappeared. Now I hear he is working for Northwestern Railroad, using a new name, new credentials. But it is him, I am sure of it." Catherine felt a surge of hope. "Then you can arrest him." "I need evidence." Cross's expression was apologetic. "I need witnesses willing to testify. I need proof that the man calling himself Victor Cain is the same man who killed that surveyor. Right now, all I have is my certainty, and that is not enough for a judge. I have proof he killed my husband." Catherine led him into the house. "And now Abigail Hawkins. And a man named Elias Crane, though we may never find his body." She laid out everything. The photograph, the bullet casing, James's journal, Cain's whispered confession at the town meeting, the pattern of intimidation and violence following the railroad's expansion. Cross listened carefully, taking notes. When she finished, he sat back and rubbed his jaw. "This is good. But most of it is circumstantial. The bullet casing could have come from any rifle. The photograph proves they knew each other, nothing more. Cain's whisper to you has no witnesses." He looked at her steadily. "I believe you, Mrs. Mercer. Everything you say fits the pattern I have seen before. But believing and proving are different things. Then what do? We make him confess. Cross leaned forward. Or we catch him in the act. Kane is getting desperate. His deadline from the railroad is approaching. Desperate men make mistakes. If we can force him to act openly, with witnesses, we can finish this. You want to use me as bait. I want to give you a chance at justice. Cross met her eyes. But yes, there is risk. Kane knows you are the key to everything. The weapons cache, assuming it exists, is on your land. The railroad route requires your property. You are the obstacle he cannot go around. He will come for you. The question is whether we are ready when he does. Catherine thought of James, of Abigail, of Elias Crane, of all the people Kane had killed or driven away, of the life she might have had if a greedy man had not decided her land was worth more than her husband's life. I am ready, she said. Tell me what you need me to do. They spent the evening planning. Cross had 2 deputies with him, good men he trusted. They would position themselves around the property, hidden but close enough to respond quickly. Catherine would go about her normal routine, making herself visible, tempting Kane to act. He will not come himself, Cross warned. He will send men. Try to make it look like an accident or a robbery gone wrong. We need to take them alive if possible. Get them to testify against Kane. And if they will not testify, then we use them to draw Kane out. Cross checked his revolver. One way or another, this ends soon. That night, Catherine lay in bed, listening to the house settle around her. Samuel was asleep in the room that had once been meant for a nursery. Cross and his deputies were hidden in the barn, the stable, the workshop, waiting. Catherine's hand rested on her stomach. She had been feeling strange lately, nauseous in the mornings, tired. She had assumed it was stress, grief, fear. But tonight, lying in the darkness, she allowed herself to wonder. When was her last monthly course? She tried to count backward, before the barn burned, before Elias Crane came, before even that. 8 weeks? 9? It was not possible. She had lost 3 babies. The last one had damaged something inside her, the doctor said. Another pregnancy was unlikely, and she and James had stopped trying months before he died. But bodies did not always follow logic. Catherine had seen enough during the war to know that. She had seen women give birth in artillery barrages, babies born healthy against all odds. Life was stubborn. It found a way. She closed her eyes and tried not to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope could break you when it was taken away. The attack came just before dawn. Catherine woke to the sound of breaking glass. She rolled out of bed instantly, grabbing the pistol from her nightstand. Samuel appeared in her doorway, rifle in hand, his young face alert. "How many?" Catherine whispered. 3 at the front, 2 coming around back. Samuel had been on watch, as they had planned. Cross's deputies are moving to intercept. Downstairs, something crashed. Heavy footsteps. Men's voices, low and urgent. Catherine moved to the landing, peering down. 2 figures in the front room, backlit by moonlight through the broken window. One was rifling through her desk. The other held a torch. They were going to burn the house, with her in it. Catherine raised her pistol, sighting carefully the way James's journal had taught her. Breathe, steady, the space between heartbeats. She fired. The man with the torch screamed and dropped it. The torch rolled across the floor, spilling flame. The second man whirled, gun in hand. Catherine fired again. The bullet splintered wood next to his head. He dove for cover. Samuel fired from beside her, his shot punching through the wall where the second man had ducked. Return fire came immediately. Bullets tore through the upper floor, forcing them back. Then Cross's voice, loud and authoritative. "United States Marshal, drop your weapons and surrender." The gunfire intensified. Catherine heard Cross's deputies joining the fight, their shots precise and controlled. The men downstairs were caught in a crossfire. One tried to run out the back and ran straight into a deputy. There was a brief struggle, then silence. "It is over," Cross called up the stairs. "You can come down." Catherine and Samuel descended carefully. The front room was a wreck. Furniture overturned. glass everywhere. The torch had started a small fire, but Cross was already stamping it out. 2 men lay on the floor, hands bound behind them. One was wounded in the shoulder, Catherine's shot. The other looked terrified. Cross hauled them to their feet. "Start talking. Who sent you?" The wounded man spat blood. "Go to hell." "Wrong answer." Cross shoved him toward a deputy. "Lock them in the root cellar for now. We will see if a few hours in the dark makes them more cooperative." As the deputies dragged the prisoners away, Catherine heard horses, many horses. She ran to the window. In the dawn light, she could see riders approaching. At least a dozen, maybe more. And at their head, sitting tall in his saddle, was Victor Kane. "He brought everyone," Samuel breathed. Cross joined them at the window, his jaw tightened. "He knows we arrested his men. This is his endgame. He is going to try to take the property by force. Can we hold them?" Cross looked at Catherine, at Samuel, at his 2 deputies. 5 against 12. The odds were not good, but he nodded anyway. "We have better position, better cover, if we are smart and they are stupid, maybe." Catherine thought of Abigail Hawkins, of James, of every person Kane had hurt or killed. She felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. "If he wants a war," she said quietly, "then we will give him one." Cross smiled grimly. "Get to your positions. And Mrs. Mercer, try not to kill anyone if you can help it. Dead men cannot testify." The riders stopped at the edge of the property. Kane dismounted and walked forward alone, stopping 50 yards from the house. His voice carried clearly in the morning stillness. "Mrs. Mercer, I know you are in there. I know the marshal is with you. This does not have to end in bloodshed." Catherine opened the front door but stayed behind cover. "Then leave, Mr. Kane, right away and never come back." "You know I cannot do that." Kane's voice was reasonable, almost gentle. "The railroad needs this land. I need what is buried here. We can still reach an agreement. $20,000. Enough to start over anywhere you want. I do not want your money. I want justice for my husband." James knew too much. Kane shrugged as if discussing the weather. "He forced my hand. Just as you are forcing it now. I gave you chances. Multiple chances. But you insist on being difficult. You murdered him." Catherine's voice shook. "You shot him in the back and threw his body off a cliff." "Yes." Kane's admission was casual, almost bored. "I did. And I killed Elias Crane. And Abigail Hawkins. And Thomas Torres, though you may not have known about that one." He gestured broadly. "I have killed everyone who stood in my way. That is what successful men do, Mrs. Mercer. We remove obstacles." Marshal Cross stepped into the doorway. "Victor Kane, you are under arrest for murder. Order your men to stand down." Kane laughed. "Arrest me? With what army, Marshal? You are outnumbered, outgunned, and very far from help." He raised his hand. "My men have rifles trained on every window of that house. Surrender now, or we will burn it down around you." Catherine felt the weight of the pistol in her hand. She thought of the baby she might be carrying, the future she might still have. Then she thought of James's journal, of all the tactical lessons he had written, of the one truth that ran through every page. The enemy with superior numbers expects you to be afraid. Use that expectation against them. She stepped fully into the doorway, standing beside Cross. "Mr. Kane," she called, "before you do something you will regret, you should know something. The weapons cache you have been searching for? It is not here." Kane's confident expression flickered. "You are lying. James moved it years ago." Catherine held up the journal. "It is all in here. Every weapon, every crate of ammunition, every ounce of explosives. He transported it all to a new location, somewhere only I know. So even if you kill me, even if you take this land, you will never find what you are looking for." The silence stretched. Kane stared at her, his pale eyes calculating. "You are bluffing." "Am I?" Catherine opened the journal to a random page. "Would you like me to read you the inventory? 243 rifles, 50,000 rounds of ammunition, 300 pounds of dynamite, all of it gone, all of it hidden, where you will never find it unless I tell you. Kane's hand moved to his gun. "Then you will tell me. Before you die, you will tell me everything." "No." Catherine's voice was steel. "I will not. And you know why? Because my husband taught me something you never learned. Some things are worth more than money. Some things are worth dying for." Kane drew his gun. "Then die." Everything happened at once. Kane fired. Catherine dove back inside as the bullet splintered the doorframe. Cross and his deputies opened fire. The riders scattered, returning fire. Glass shattered. Wood exploded. The world became noise and smoke and terror. Catherine crawled to the window, raised her pistol, and began to shoot. Not to kill, to wound, to disable. One rider fell from his horse, clutching his leg. Another dropped his rifle, hand bleeding. Samuel was firing from upstairs, his shots wild but enthusiastic. But there were too many. Kane's men were advancing, using the burned barn as cover. Bullets tore through the house. Cross went down, blood spreading across his shoulder. One deputy fell back wounded. They were being overrun. Catherine reloaded with shaking hands. This was it. This was how it ended. She thought of the baby, of the life she would never get to live. She raised her pistol for what might be her last shot. Then, from the road, came a sound that changed everything. Bugle call. Military. Cavalry. Riders in blue uniforms poured over the ridge. 20 of them. 30. Led by an officer with captain's bars. They came at full gallop, rifles raised, shouting commands. "This is Captain Michael Reed of the 7th Cavalry. Drop your weapons immediately." Kane's men broke and ran. Some dropped their guns and raised their hands. Others tried to flee and were ridden down. In less than 2 minutes, it was over. Soldiers swarmed the property, disarming prisoners, securing the area. Kane stood alone in the yard, his gun hanging loose in his hand. He looked at Catherine through the broken doorway. Their eyes met, and in that moment she saw everything: the rage, the frustration, the disbelief that he had lost. Then he raised his gun to his own temple. "No!" Catherine ran out, but she was too late. The shot echoed across the valley. Kane crumpled to the ground, blood pooling in the dirt. Catherine stood over his body, breathing hard. She felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not horror, just emptiness. Marshal Cross staggered out of the house, clutching his wounded shoulder. Captain Reed dismounted and saluted. "Got your message, Marshal. Sorry it took so long. We were on patrol up near the border. You came just in time." Cross looked at Catherine. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "But others are. We need the doctor." The next hours passed in a blur. Wounded men were treated. Prisoners were secured. Statements were taken. Catherine answered questions in a daze, her mind far away. As the sun climbed toward noon, she found herself sitting on her porch steps. Samuel brought her water. She drank mechanically, tasting nothing. "Is it over?" the boy asked. "I think so." Catherine looked at the blood-stained yard, at the soldiers moving through her property, at Kane's body being wrapped in canvas. "I think it is finally over." That night, after everyone had left except Samuel and one of the deputies standing guard, Catherine went down to the workshop. She sat at James's desk and opened his journal one last time. Near the back, she found a page she had not noticed before. A letter written in James's hand, addressed to her. "My dearest Catherine, if you are reading this, then I have failed you. I am sorry. I tried to protect you from all of this, the weapons, the danger, the ugly parts of my past. I wanted you to have a peaceful life, a happy life. But I fear my past has caught up with me, and you are paying the price. The cache I wrote about earlier, it does not exist. I destroyed it all years ago, threw every rifle into the deepest part of the Missouri River, detonated the explosives in an abandoned mine. The government paid me to guard ghosts, but the lie was useful. It kept people away. It gave us peace, until Kane figured out the truth. I do not know what will happen when you read this. But I know you, Catherine. I know your strength, your courage, your stubborn refusal to give up. Use those qualities now. Survive. Live the life we planned. and know that every moment with you was worth whatever price I had to pay. With all my love, James." Catherine closed the journal. Tears ran down her face. She pressed her hand to her stomach, to the life that might be growing there. "I survived," she whispered. "We survived. Now we have to figure out how to live." The sun had not yet risen when Catherine woke to the sound of hammering. She lay still for a moment, disoriented, before memory returned. The battle. Kane's death. The cavalry arriving just in time. 3 days had passed since then, but her body still carried the tension, muscles tight as wire. She dressed quickly and went to the window. In the yard below, Samuel and 2 soldiers were clearing debris from the burned barn. Captain Reed had left a small detail behind, ostensibly to secure the property, while Marshal Cross recovered from his shoulder wound. But Catherine suspected they were also there to protect her. Word had spread through the territory. The widow who had stood against the railroad, the woman who had brought down Victor Kane. She did not feel like a hero. She felt exhausted. Catherine descended the stairs and found Marshal Cross at her kitchen table, his arm in a sling, drinking coffee. Dr. Preston had removed the bullet 2 days ago. The wound was clean, healing well, but Cross moved carefully, favoring his left side. "Morning, Mrs. Mercer," he gestured to the pot. "Made coffee. Hope you do not mind." "Your coffee is better than mine anyway." Catherine poured herself a cup and sat across from him. "Have you heard anything from Helena?" Cross nodded. "The territorial governor wants a full report. Northwestern Railroad is claiming ignorance of Kane's methods. They are offering compensation to families who lost property, trying to salvage their reputation." Catherine's hands tightened on her cup. "And the murders? What about justice for James, for Abigail?" 2 of Kane's men are talking. Trying to save their own necks, they have given sworn statements about the barn burning, the attack on your house, the fire that killed Mrs. Hawkins. Cross leaned back. "It is not perfect. Kane is dead, so he will never stand trial. But the truth is coming out. That is something. Something." Catherine stared into her coffee. It did not feel like enough, but perhaps nothing would. "There is more." Cross pulled a telegram from his pocket. "This arrived last night. Northwestern Railroad is withdrawing their claim on your property. They are rerouting the rail line 10 miles south. Costs them more, but they want distance from the scandal." Catherine read the telegram twice, not quite believing it. "So it is over. I can stay. You can stay." Cross smiled slightly. "Though I imagine there will be reporters, curiosity seekers. Your story is spreading fast. The widow who stood against corporate tyranny. It makes for good newspaper copy. I do not want to be a story." Catherine stood abruptly. "I just want to be left alone." She walked outside, needing air, needing space. The morning was cold, frost glittering on the grass. Winter was coming. She would need to rebuild the barn before the snow fell. Restock hay, repair the damage to the house. The list of tasks was overwhelming. Samuel approached, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the chill. "Morning, ma'am. We have cleared most of the big timbers. Some of the foundation stones are still good. We could start rebuilding next week if you want." "Thank you, Samuel." Catherine looked at the boy, really looked at him. In the past 2 weeks he had grown up. The softness of youth had been burned away, replaced by something harder. He had killed 2 of Kane's men during the final battle. She had seen him weeping afterward, shaking, trying to reconcile what he had done with who he thought he was. "How are you doing?" "Really?" Samuel shrugged. "I do not know. Some days I think I am fine. Other days I see their faces, the men I shot. I know they were trying to kill us. I know I did not have a choice, but it does not make it easier. No." Catherine put her hand on his shoulder. "It does not. And anyone who tells you it should get easier is lying. You carry it. That is all you can do. You carry it, and you try to do better going forward." They stood together in the cold morning, 2 survivors trying to make sense of what they had been through. Finally Samuel spoke again, his voice quiet. "What will you do now? Will you stay here?" Catherine looked across her land, the fields that needed plowing, the creek that ran silver in the distance, the mountains standing eternal against the sky. James was buried on the hill. Their child, if there was a child, would be born here. This was home, soaked in blood and loss, but home nonetheless. "Yes," she said, "I will stay. There is nowhere else I want to be." That afternoon, Catherine rode into town. She had been avoiding it, not ready to face the stares and whispers, but there were things she needed, supplies, nails, lumber, and she needed to see for herself what remained of Abigail's store. Clearwater was quieter than usual. People stopped talking when she rode past. Some nodded respectfully. Others looked away. Catherine tied her horse outside the general store and went inside. The proprietor, a nervous man named Wilson, nearly dropped a bag of flour when he saw her. "Mrs. Mercer, I did not expect you. Welcome. What can I get for you?" Catherine handed him a list. He scurried to fill it, stealing glances at her as he worked. She ignored him, studying the other customers. 3 women clustered near the fabric. They were whispering, but not quietly enough. "Heard she shot 4 men herself, like something out of a dime novel. I heard it was 6. And that she is actually a trained assassin from back east. My husband says the government paid her to protect some kind of secret weapon buried on her land." Catherine cleared her throat. The women jumped, faces flushing. "I shot 2 men," she said calmly, "both in self-defense. I am not an assassin. And there is nothing buried on my property except rocks and tree roots. Anything else you would like to know?" The women scattered like startled birds. Wilson laughed nervously as he wrapped her purchases. "People love a good story, Mrs. Mercer. You cannot blame them for being curious. I can blame them for spreading lies." Catherine paid and gathered her parcels. "Good day, Mr. Wilson." She walked down the main street toward where the Hawkins store had stood. The ruins had been partially cleared, some of the timber salvaged. But the foundation remained, a black scar on the earth. Someone had placed flowers there, a makeshift memorial. Catherine knelt and added her own wildflowers to the pile. "I am sorry, Abigail," she whispered. "You tried to help and it got you killed. That is not fair. None of this is fair." She stood and found Sheriff Vaughn watching her from across the street. He looked older, thinner, haunted. He had submitted his resignation the day after the battle. The town council had refused it, but everyone knew he was finished. Trust, once broken, could not be easily repaired. "Mrs. Mercer." Vaughn approached slowly, hat in hand. "I want to apologize. Again, I know words are not enough, but I need you to know how sorry I am." Catherine studied him. Vaughn had provided the bullet casing that helped expose Kane. He had stood watch during the final battle, wounded but fighting. He was trying in his clumsy way to make amends. "You let him get away with murdering my husband," she said quietly. "You chose your job, your safety, over the truth. I do not know if I can forgive that. I understand." Vaughn's voice cracked. "I do not know if I can forgive it either. But I am trying to do better, trying to be the man James thought I was. Then keep trying." Catherine turned to go, then stopped. "And Sheriff? James would have forgiven you. He believed people could change, could be better than their worst moments. I am not as generous as he was, but I am trying to learn." She left Vaughn standing by the memorial and walked back to her horse. As she mounted, a voice called her name. She turned to see a woman approaching. Young, perhaps 25, with red-rimmed eyes and a toddler clinging to her skirts. "Mrs. Mercer? I am Sarah Kane, Victor's wife." Catherine froze. She had not known Kane was married, had not thought of him as a man with a family, only as a monster. "I am sorry for your loss," Catherine heard herself say. It was a reflex, the words empty. Sarah shook her head. "Do not be. Victor was not a good man. I knew that. I just did not know how bad until after he died. The marshal told me everything, the murders, the lies." She looked down at her child. "I wanted you to know that I am leaving, taking my son back east. I do not want him growing up with that name, that legacy." Catherine looked at the child, innocent, unaware that his father had been a killer. "What will you tell him when he is older?" "The truth," Sarah's voice was firm, that his father made terrible choices, that violence only breeds more violence, that there are better ways to live. She met Catherine's eyes. "And I will tell him about you, about the woman who stood up to his father, who fought for justice. Maybe it will help him understand the difference between strength and cruelty." "I am not a hero," Catherine said quietly. "I am just someone who refused to give up. Maybe that is what a hero is." Sarah shifted her child to her other hip. "Goodbye, Mrs. Mercer. I hope you find peace." Catherine watched them walk away, this widow and orphan created by the same man who had made her a widow. The weight of it pressed down on her, so much loss, so much pain, and for what? Land, money, pride. She rode home as the sun began to set, turning the sky the color of fire. That night, Catherine could not sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her hand on her stomach. The nausea had gotten worse, the fatigue more pronounced. She knew she should see Dr. Preston, get confirmation. But she was afraid to hope, afraid to lose another child. Finally, she rose and lit a lamp. She went down to the workshop, to James's desk, and pulled out the journal. She had read it cover to cover now. Every tactic, every strategy, every modification to every weapon. But tonight she turned to the personal entries, the ones where James had written not as a soldier, but as a husband. She found an entry from 3 years ago, dated a week after her last miscarriage. "Catherine is sleeping now, finally. The laudanum the doctor gave her helped. But I heard her crying earlier when she thought I could not hear. My heart is broken for her, for us, for the children we will never hold. I do not know how to fix this. I cannot shoot the problem, cannot outthink it. All I can do is hold her and promise that we will survive this, that we are enough, just the two of us. I hope I am right. I hope she believes me, because I cannot imagine this life without her." Catherine's tears fell onto the page, blurring the ink. James had been right. They had been enough, even without children, even with all the loss. They had been enough for each other. But now he was gone. And if she was pregnant, she would face it alone. A soft knock at the workshop door startled her. Samuel's voice came through. "Mrs. Mercer, are you all right? I saw the light. Come in." Samuel descended the stairs, concern on his young face. He saw her tears and hesitated. "Should I go?" "No." Catherine wiped her eyes. "Sit with me. I do not want to be alone right now." They sat together in the lamplight. After a long silence, Samuel spoke. "My brother used to say that the worst part of losing someone is not the big moments, not the funeral or the first few days. It is the small things. Turning to tell them something and realizing they are not there. Making too much coffee because you forget you are alone. Waking up and thinking maybe it was all a dream." Catherine nodded. "Yes, exactly that. Does it get easier? I do not know. Ask me in a year." She managed a small smile. "But I think we learn to carry it. The grief becomes part of us. We build our lives around it instead of trying to erase it." Samuel nodded slowly. "I am glad you are staying. I do not have anywhere else to go. And you," he hesitated, "you are like family now. Is that strange to say?" "No." Catherine reached out and squeezed his shoulder. "You are family to me too, Samuel. We survived something terrible together. That bonds people." They sat in comfortable silence until the lamp began to gutter. Then they climbed the stairs together and went to their separate rooms. But Catherine felt less alone than she had in months. The next morning, she rode to Dr. Preston's office. He examined her with professional detachment, asking questions, making notes. When he finished, he removed his spectacles and cleaned them carefully. "Well?" Catherine's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "You are pregnant, Mrs. Mercer." Preston's voice was gentle. "About 32 weeks along, I would estimate. Early 8th month." Catherine's breath caught. "That is impossible. I would have known. I would have felt something." Preston shook his head. "Not necessarily. You have been under enormous stress. Your body has been in survival mode. Some women do not show much, especially if they have strong abdominal muscles from physical labor. And given your history of losses, Your mind may have refused to acknowledge the signs, protecting you from potential grief. But that would mean, Catherine's mind raced backward. James, this baby is James's. Yes, Preston nodded. Conceived in late February, I would estimate. Shortly before your husband passed. You are quite fortunate, Mrs. Mercer. After everything your body has been through, the battles, the stress, the grief, this child has held on. That is remarkable. Catherine sat very still. The words seemed to come from far away. All these months she had been carrying James's child without knowing it, fighting for her life while protecting another life inside her. The nausea, the fatigue, she had attributed to grief and stress. But it had been this, a miracle hiding in plain sight. Are you certain? As certain as I can be. Preston's expression softened. I know you have lost children before. I know you are afraid. But this baby is strong, Mrs. Mercer. You are in your final trimester now. If you rest, if you take care of yourself, I see no reason why you should not deliver a healthy child in late February. Catherine pressed her hands to her stomach, feeling now what she had been too numb to notice before. The firmness, the occasional flutter she had dismissed as hunger or nerves. How had she not known? Your body knew, Preston said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. It protected you by keeping the knowledge buried until you were strong enough to handle it. Now you know, and now you can prepare. Catherine nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She paid and left quickly, before the tears could start. Outside she sat on the bench and let herself cry. For James, who would never know he was going to be a father. For the children she had lost. For the impossible miracle of this new life that had survived against all odds. For everything that had been taken and everything that remained. Catherine nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She paid and left quickly, before the tears could start. Outside she sat on a bench and let herself cry. For James, who would never know he was going to be a father. For the children she had lost. For the impossible miracle of this new life growing inside her. For everything that had been taken and everything that remained. When the tears stopped, she felt hollowed out but somehow lighter. She had a reason now, a purpose beyond mere survival. She was going to have James's child, and she was going to build a life for that child here, on this land they had fought for. The weeks passed. Catherine threw herself into rebuilding. The barn rose slowly, new timber replacing charred. Samuel worked beside her, learning carpentry, asking questions, growing into the man he would become. Marshal Cross visited weekly, checking on them, bringing news from Helena. The territorial governor had formally apologized for Northwestern Railroad's actions. Compensation had been offered to families affected by Kane's campaign of terror. Some took it. Others, like Catherine, refused. Money could not bring back the dead. 3 of Kane's men were tried and convicted of arson and attempted murder. They would spend the next 15 years in territorial prison. The rest had fled, disappeared into the vastness of the frontier. Cross was still hunting them. As winter settled over Clearwater Valley, Catherine's pregnancy became visible. The town gossips had a field day. Some counted backward, whispering that the baby must have been conceived before James died. Others suggested darker possibilities. Catherine ignored them all. On a cold January morning, she stood on the hill above her farm, looking at James's grave. Snow covered the ground, pristine and white. She had brought a pine branch green against the winter landscape. I wish you were here, she said quietly, to see this, to know. She touched her growing belly. We are going to have a baby, James. I do not know how it is possible, but it is true. Dr. Preston says I am 8 months along now. The baby will be here soon. The wind moved through the pine trees, a sound like breathing. Catherine imagined it was James, somehow listening, somehow still present. I am scared, she admitted, of losing this baby like I lost the others, of raising a child alone, of all the ways I might fail. But I am going to try. For you, for us, for the future we planned. She placed the pine branch against the headstone and turned to walk back down the hill. The wind moved through the pine trees, carrying the scent of snow and evergreen. Catherine paused halfway down, looking back at the grave one more time. "I wish you could see him, James, our son." She touched her growing belly. "He has your eyes already, I think. Or maybe I am just hoping." The wind gusted, rattling the branches. Catherine imagined it was James somehow listening, somehow still present in the land he had loved. She had stopped believing in ghosts months ago, but she allowed herself this small comfort. The dead lived on in memory, in the lives they touched, in the children they left behind. She walked back to the farmhouse as snow began to fall, soft and thick. Samuel was chopping wood in the yard, his breath misting in the cold air. He waved when he saw her, and she waved back. This was her family now. Samuel, who had stayed, the baby who was coming, and the memory of James, who had given everything to protect them. Inside, she made tea and sat at the kitchen table with James's journal open before her. She read his final letter again, understanding now what he had done. The weapons were gone, destroyed years ago. Cain had died chasing a phantom, and James had orchestrated it all, protecting her even from beyond the grave. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty room, "for the deception, for the protection, for loving me enough to destroy something dangerous rather than profit from it." She closed the journal and placed her hand on her stomach. The baby kicked, a flutter of movement that made her smile. Life continuing, hope persisting, the future unfolding despite everything that had tried to stop it. Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the world in white, cleansing, renewing. Catherine watched through the window and felt, for the first time since James's death, something close to peace. The winter deepened. Catherine spent her days preparing. She read books on childbirth, stockpiled supplies. Samuel converted the extra bedroom into a nursery, building a cradle from pine wood, simple but sturdy. Marshal Cross visited less frequently as the snows made travel difficult, but he sent letters. The world was moving on. Northwestern had completed their railroad on the southern route. Clearwater was becoming a backwater again, forgotten by progress. Catherine found she did not mind. On a February morning, with snow falling soft and thick, the pains started. Catherine sent Samuel for Dr. Preston, and then, calmly, prepared. She had delivered babies during the war. She knew what was coming. The pain, the fear, the primal struggle of bringing life into the world. Preston arrived within the hour, his bag in hand. Behind him came 2 women from town, experienced midwives. They took over her bedroom with efficient authority. Catherine surrendered to their care. The labor lasted 14 hours, long enough for doubt to creep in, long enough to remember the other times, the losses, the children who never drew breath. But Catherine fought through the pain, through the fear, holding on to one thought. This baby was James's gift, his legacy, and she would not let go. At 3 in the morning, as winter wind rattled the windows, her son was born. He came into the world squalling, red-faced and furious. Preston held him up, grinning. "Healthy boy, Mrs. Mercer. Got a good set of lungs on him." Catherine reached out with trembling arms. They placed her son on her chest, still slick with birth, impossibly small. His eyes opened, unfocused but searching, and Catherine fell in love so completely, so absolutely, that it hurt. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, little one. I am your mother. And your father, he was the best man I ever knew." The baby's tiny hand closed around her finger. His grip was surprisingly strong. Catherine laughed and cried at the same time, overwhelmed by joy and grief in equal measure. "What will you name him?" one of the midwives asked. Catherine thought of Elias Crane, who had brought her the truth, of James, who had loved her through everything, of the life this child represented, hope born from ashes. "Elias James Mercer," she said. "So he carries the names of men who fought for what was right." The midwives cleaned the baby and settled him in Catherine's arms. They checked her, made sure she was healing properly, then left her alone with her son. Dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the curtains. Samuel knocked softly and entered. His eyes went wide when he saw the baby. "Is he all right? Are you all right?" "We are both fine," Catherine smiled. "Want to hold him?" Samuel approached like the baby was made of glass. Catherine showed him how to support the head, how to cradle the small body. Samuel's face transformed, wonder replacing fear. "He looks like Mr. Mercer," the boy said quietly. "Around the eyes." "Yes." Catherine felt tears threatening again. "He does." They sat together in the early morning light, 2 survivors and a newborn, forming a family from the wreckage of loss. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. Cleansing, renewing. The months that followed were hard in different ways. Catherine had forgotten how demanding an infant could be. The sleepless nights, the constant feeding, the worry that something would go wrong. But Elias thrived. He grew fat and healthy, his lungs never failing to announce his needs. Spring came to Clearwater Valley. The snow melted, grass returned. Catherine planted a garden, working with Elias strapped to her back, Samuel helping with the heavy labor. The new barn was finished. Livestock was purchased. Slowly, carefully, the farm returned to life. On a warm May afternoon, Catherine carried Elias up to James's grave. The baby was 3 months old now, his eyes the same gray as his father's. Catherine sat on the grass and let Elias lie on a blanket in the sunshine. "I wanted you to meet your son," she told the headstone. "He has your stubbornness, your determination. He grips onto things and will not let go." She smiled. "I think you would like him. I think you would be proud." She laid a hand on the cool stone. "I am doing all right, James. Some days are harder than others, but I am building something here. Not just a farm, a life, a future, for Elias, for myself." She paused. "I am not the same person I was when you died. I am harder, more careful. I have killed people. I have seen terrible things. But I have also learned that I am stronger than I knew. You always believed that. I wish I had believed it sooner." Elias made a soft sound, his fist waving in the air. Catherine picked him up and held him close. "Watch over us," she whispered. "Wherever you are, watch over your son." She walked back down the hill as the sun began to set. The farmhouse stood solid against the evening sky. Smoke rose from the chimney. Samuel was in the yard, chopping wood. It was a scene of domestic peace, hard-won and precious. That night, after Elias was asleep, Catherine sat at her kitchen table with paper and pen. Marshall Cross had written suggesting she tell her story. For the newspapers, for history, to show other women what was possible when they refused to surrender. Catherine stared at the blank page for a long time. Finally, she began to write. "My name is Catherine Mercer. I am a widow, a mother, and a survivor. This is my story, not because I am special, not because I am a hero, but because I was an ordinary woman who found herself in extraordinary circumstances, and I refused to break." She wrote through the night, about James, about the barn burning, about Cain and the weapons and the final battle. She wrote about fear and courage, about loss and hope, about the terrible price of justice and the even higher cost of silence. When she finished, dawn was breaking. Catherine read over what she had written, then folded the pages carefully. She would send them to Cross. Let him decide what to do with them. Her part was done. She went to check on Elias. He slept peacefully, his small chest rising and falling with each breath. Catherine stood over the cradle, marveling at the impossible fact of his existence. Out of so much death, this life. Out of so much darkness, this light. Elias James Mercer, named for truth-tellers and good men. He would grow up knowing his father's story, knowing the cost his mother had paid to keep this land. And he would learn, Catherine promised herself, that some things were worth fighting for, that justice mattered, that one person, standing firm, could make a difference. But he would also learn mercy, compassion, the value of peace. Because Catherine had seen what vengeance looked like, had tasted it. And while justice was necessary, forgiveness was what allowed people to move forward. She would teach him both, the strength to fight and the wisdom to know when fighting was not the answer. The sun rose over Clearwater Valley, golden and warm. Catherine carried Elias outside to feel the morning air. Samuel emerged from the barn, saw them, and waved. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully. Birds sang in the cottonwoods along the creek. It was an ordinary morning, unremarkable, beautiful in its simplicity. Catherine looked down at her son. "This is what your father died for," she told him softly. "Not the land, not the weapons. This, peace. The chance for you to grow up safe. The freedom to choose your own path." Elias blinked up at her, his gray eyes solemn. Catherine kissed his forehead and walked out into the day. There was work to be done. There was always work to be done. But for the first time since James's death, Catherine felt something she had not dared to feel: hope. Not the fragile hope of wishes and dreams, but the hard-earned hope of someone who had walked through fire and emerged scarred but whole. The hope of survival, of persistence, of a future built deliberately, carefully, from the ashes of the past. She had been tested and had not broken. She had fought and had won, though the victory looked nothing like she had imagined. And now, with her son in her arms and spring returning to the valley, Catherine Mercer stood on her land and felt something close to peace. The story of the widow who stood against the railroad would spread. It would grow and change, becoming legend more than truth. But the reality was simpler and more profound. She was a woman who had lost everything and had chosen to rebuild, who had faced evil and had refused to become it, who had found in the depths of grief and violence a reason to keep living. And that, Catherine thought as she watched the sun climb higher, was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.